Hello, delegates. It's a pleasure to be sort of with you. I remember the good old days when if you said you were with somebody, that meant you were in the same room as them. Instead of now where it means you're on a screen somewhere where they can look at it. So it'd be nice to get back to the good old days, won't it? Oh, I shouldn't make jokes because I imagine this convention is a very solemn affair. I'm sure you're all really sad and distressed that your beloved premier has stepped down. Yeah, a lot of weeping and moaning, I'm sure, to mark his passage. But look, he did a real service to Manitoba. He proved that democracy is alive and well, because what he proved is that anybody can be elected premier, not just those with brains and talent. Anyway, the two candidates to replace him are not exactly time to relax, are they? This is neither one of them is going to be setting the province on a better new course. If it's a new course at all, it has the potential to be as bad or worse. So not good news for us, the two candidates, but you're used to that. Pallister couldn't defeat you, and neither will those two when they get, whichever one of them gets elected. I find it interesting that Pallister and Jason Kenney have for a couple of years now been in some sort of perverse contest about who's the worst premier in the country. And now Pallister is gone and Jason Kenney is as good as gone because he won't survive till the next election in Alberta. So the two worst premiers are both being shown the door by the population. Anyway, let me take a moment to thank Michelle and Charlotte. Your leaders there play a very important and positive role in the National Executive Board, and I thank them for that. I also thank Jean-Guy. We rely on him heavily. He makes a real contribution to the work of the National Union, and we ask him for help on a number of occasions, and it's always there, ready, willing, and able. So really appreciate that. So we've gotten through federal election, and it's now business as usual, is it? Well, business as usual doesn't mean it's calm, does it? We have three overarching serious crises to deal with. There's the climate crisis, which affects every member of the National Union because everybody lives in this country, on this world. It also affects a lot of our members in a different way. The EMS people who have to dash into where there's been a climate disaster, our wildfire fighters and fighting the forest fires that were just so prevalent in the last few years. Our healthcare people are going to be facing new threats that they haven't even encountered before. We got a lot of people on the front lines, and their safety is a major concern of ours as we deal with the climate crisis. And we've also got people whose job it is to work with governments to try and mitigate the climate crisis. And we want to work with them and capture the best of their ideas. So the climate emergency is very much on our agenda. And so is the wealth and income inequality crisis. It was bad before the pandemic. You know, we've talked about this for a decade now, at least, but the pandemic made it worse. I'm sure you've seen some of the awful stories about how the wealth of the wealthy just went up like a rocket during the pandemic while other people were suffering. The income and wealth inequality is not an abstraction. Our members pay for it every day when they go to work. The strongest unions in Canada have sort of kept pace with where their members were. They haven't dropped an awful lot, but they haven't gained either in any significant way. And that's because income inequality is a serious problem for all of us. There is more wealth in this country, but it isn't spread around the way it used to be. It's all gone to the top. And part of our crises response is to the threat of austerity. We know that your government, many governments across the country are going to use the excuse of the COVID pandemic to say, well, now we've spent all the money and we now need to tighten our belts. We need new austerity. Many governments are all too happy to embrace austerity, whatever the reason. They just want austerity and they'll come up with whatever reason they can. And the COVID crisis will just be a new excuse for them. But you know, the fact is, it's not true. Provincial governments did not spend all of their money on COVID. Most of the money that was spent on COVID came from the federal government. And there is a way to deal with the lack of balance between expenditures and income, and that's to increase your income. It's called fair taxation. If governments are serious about deficits and about bringing their economy back into line, they should increase taxes. There is no question about that. For 20 years or so, we've been seeing, probably 30 years now, actually, we've seen cuts in corporate income tax, we've seen cuts in income taxes for the wealthy. And so these governments have got no excuse. They say, well, we don't have enough money. The fact is that they turned down money that they used to get from taxes. They sent it back, cut taxes, never created a job with that. They just simply made it harder for them to operate. And in the United Kingdom and the United States, we've got governments there that have increased corporate taxes markedly because they've seen the writing on the wall. They can't keep on simply cutting public services every time that the word deficit comes up. So those are our three big overarching crises. There's lots else on our plate. Federal transfers of the provinces, we want that to be with more strings attached because some provinces are taking the federal money and not doing what they're supposed to be doing with it. They're doing it for other reasons. They're allowing for more private for-profit healthcare delivery. They're doing all sorts of things that should not be allowed. So we're calling continuously on the federal government more transfers, but with strings attached to make sure that the rules are being followed. And on that one, we want the federal government to help pay for long-term care, but we want that to happen with huge strings attached, and that means no more for-profit in long-term care. You all remember the horror stories about what happened to people in for-profit homes when the owners of those homes didn't staff them well, they didn't pay their staff well, they didn't take care of the people that were living there. And the death rate was atrocious, awful, horrific. And we can't have that continue in a civilized society. The overdose crisis, we've got an eye on that. We've got far too many members across the country who work on the front lines of dealing with the overdose crisis. And it's gotten worse. It's gotten worse since the pandemic. So that's on our radar. Anti-racism is an issue that we don't want to ever get to be second place. We want to continue to work on that. We've had a special committee working to make sure that we're dealing with racism effectively. And now we're setting up an Indigenous group where we're going to bring people from across the country together to say, are we representing our Indigenous members well enough? Are we making space for them in our unions well enough? So racism and Indigenous relations very much on our agenda as well. Domestic violence, we've never lost sight of that. During the pandemic, domestic violence became a pandemic within a pandemic, and we need to have a national program to deal with it. And we've got a major advance on childcare. We've got childcare on the national agenda, but we don't have all the details worked out. As they sometimes say, the devil is in the details, and we've got 10 different provinces that are going to work out separate deals with the federal government. And we need to be on top of all of those arrangements to make sure that they deliver real, reliable, low cost, publicly delivered, not-for-profit childcare. So the fight is winnable, and we've won some of it, but it isn't a fight that's over yet. So we got lots of stuff to do. But you know what? Since the pandemic, it's increasingly clear that the public is on our side in so many of these issues. About 80% of the public believes in strong action by the federal government and the provincial governments to deal with the climate crisis. 75% of the public believe that there needs to be affordable, reliable, not-for-profit childcare across the country. About 90% think that the federal government and the provincial governments have got to fix the problem of long-term care and get for-profit out of long-term care. We need to have that as a public, not-for-profit system right across the board. So the people of Canada and the people of Manitoba deserve strong healthcare, environmental protection, strong education systems, strong public services across the board. An argument that they can't is simply nonsense. The argument that they can't be provided simply ignores the fact that taxes for the corporations and the wealthy have been cut and cut and cut again, and they're not paying their fair share. In the United States and the United Kingdom, as I said, governments there have figured that out, and they're moving to strongly increase taxes on the corporate sector. And we've got to see some of that in Canada as well. So the pandemic showed to us and everybody else just how crucially important public services are. And we want to seize the moment to rebuild. We want to put the power of our weight right behind forcing governments, provincial and federal, to rebuild and refinance and refund public services. That's what the people of Canada deserve. It won't be easy, will it? But what have we ever done that was easy? And what have we ever shied away from because it was hard? Not very much. And we're up for it. And you know what, after the heroic battle that so many of our members waged during the COVID pandemic and are still waging to serve the public, they sacrificed themselves, they worked endlessly, they exhausted themselves to serve the public. And with that example, the heroic example of so many of our members in so many different categories, I think it's fairly safe to say that we're the ones that we've been waiting for. Thanks for listening and have a good convention.